In 2022, Russia sent a threatening message to Lithuania after the NATO member state stopped transporting goods through its territory in Kaliningrad, a small city that was once part of Germany. Most of the world, particularly the United States, watched the situation anxiously for a potential escalation. There was already tension between NATO and Russia, and any escalation could have meant a new world war. So why exactly is that former German city causing so much trouble? More importantly, how did Russia even get a piece of that city? Keep watching to find out everything. Remember to like this video and subscribe to this channel for more informative videos like this. Where were we? Ah yes, Kaliningrad. This city is a disconnected district of the Russian Federation sandwiched between independent states Poland and Lithuania along the Baltic coast. The city is about 633 kilometers west from mainland Russia. It's situated on the Progolya River, at the head of the Vistula Lagoon on the Baltic Sea. And it's the only ice-free port of Russia on the Baltic Sea. Nearly 1 million Russians live there, isolated from the rest of the country. In order to get to the mainland, the Kaliningrad natives would either have to drive through at least 2 other countries when traveling by land or take a ferry across the Baltic Sea. The Kaliningrad Oblast is basically a remote Russian nation in the middle of NATO and the European Union. These two organizations have been keeping a much closer eye on the Russian exclave ever since 2014, and especially ever since February 2022 when the Russians invaded Ukraine. The city of Kaliningrad takes its name from the headquarters of the Baltic Fleet and is, therefore, home to a solid amount of Russian naval and air force. In 2015, after their first invasion and annexation of Crimea from Ukraine in 2014, and the start of heavy sanctions from the West, the Russians began deploying their ballistic missile systems. Iskander-M with a neoblast capable of striking vital European countries like Berlin, Copenhagen, Warsaw, and Stockholm with nuclear-armed missiles. Perhaps the most alarming of all to the point of view of NATO and the European Union is not necessarily that Kaliningrad Oblast itself, but the 65-kilometer wide gap between it and Belarus, a loyal Russian ally and accomplice in Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. This narrow 65 kilometers of almost flat and rural countryside is the only connection by land that the 3 Baltic states, NATO and the European Union's most exposed members to Russia, have with the rest of the alliance. If NATO ever finds itself in a hot conflict with Russia in the future, this vulnerability gives the Russian military the ability to swiftly advance across the gap from both Kaliningrad and Belarus to lock down a defensive position across the border with Poland and fully isolate the 3 Baltic states from the rest of the alliance, leaving them to fend for themselves against further Russian attacks. Also, the Baltic Fleet and Iskander-M missile batteries located in the Kaliningrad Oblast can serve to deny much of the Baltic Sea to any NATO resupplies by ship. But how did this little piece of land, hundreds of kilometers deep inside Europe, even end up being part of Russia in the first place? How did Kaliningrad Oblast become a military advantage for Russia? The settlement of modern-day Kaliningrad was founded in 1255 on the site of the old ancient Prussian fort Tvansk, as a military fortress for the Teutonic Knights during the Northern Crusades against the Baltic Prussians. It was named Königsberg in honor of King Ottokar II of Bohemia. After the Crusade, it became a settlement for Germans, and the surrounding areas were predominantly German with Polish, Lithuanian, and Latvian minorities. In 1454, the city integrated within the borders of Poland for a year thanks to the King of Poland, King Kazimierz Jagiellończyk. It became a fiefdom under the Polish king in 1466. As a symbol of its allegiance, the Black Prussian eagle had a crown around its neck bearing the letter S, derived from the Latinized name of the king, Sigismundus. In 1525, the Teutonic Order was secularized, and Königsberg became the capital of the Duchy of Prussia. In 1618, the Duchy of Prussia fell under the control of Brandenburg, a constituent state of the Holy Roman Empire. It was sometimes referred to as Brandenburg Prussia. Brandenburg Prussia became a kingdom in 1701, and it was referred to as the Kingdom of Prussia. The Brandenburg portion was a part of the Holy Roman Empire, and later the German Confederation and Prussia, later called East Prussia, was not included within those territorial boundaries. As a result of the Seven-Year War, all of East Prussia was conquered and became partly occupied by the Russian Empire between the years of 1758 and 1762. For the next 2 centuries, the city began to evolve from being part of the Kingdom of Prussia to being part of the North German Confederation in 1866, and then as part of the German Empire. It began to flourish, and many iconic landmarks of Königsberg were built. The city had around 370,000 inhabitants and was a cultural and administrative centre of Prussia and the German Empire. The first civil airport in Germany, De Waal near Königsberg, opened in 1919, and at that time a new central railway station and modern buildings for the harbour and trade fair were built. During World War II, the city of Königsberg was severely damaged by a British bombing attack in 1944, and the massive Soviet siege in the spring of 1945. At the end of World War II in 1945, the city became part of the Russian-Soviet Union. In 1946, Königsberg was renamed Kaliningrad after Mikhail Kalinin, the chairman of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR. Kalinin was not in any way related to the city, and there were already cities named in honor of Kalinin in the Soviet Union. In 1940, Kalinin was one of the 6 Politburo members who signed the order to execute more than 21,000 Polish prisoners of war at Katyn and anywhere else. In 1950, there were over 1 million inhabitants, which was only half of the number of the pre-war population, and the German language was replaced with the Russian language. A monument to Stalin stood on Victory Square from 1953 to 1962. The town hall was turned into the House of Soviets in 1973, and in 1975, the trolleybus was launched again. The Kreuzkirche building was also transferred to the Russian Orthodox Church. The Königsberg Castle was demolished with explosives in 1959, on the personal order of Leonid Brezhnev, turning deaf ears to the protests of architects, local historians, and the general residents of the city. The old city was not restored, and the last remnants of the Königsberg Castle were destroyed in the late 1960s. The names of the cities, towns, rivers, and other geological features were changed to Russian names. Threatened by hunger in the immediate post-war years, the reconstruction of the oblast was carried out through an ambitious policy of oceanic fishing, and one of the main fishing harbours of the USSR in Kaliningrad was created. Fishing not only fed the regional economy, but was also a basis for social and scientific development in oceanography. The agreement was signed in 1957, and the region became a semi-exclave to the Russian SFSR. It has been known as the Kaliningrad Oblast since 1946. Some historians claim that Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union at the time, created the Kaliningrad Oblast for many probable reasons. The city further severed the 3 Baltic states from the west, and the ice-free port it now provided to the Soviet naval system was considered very strategically valuable to be placed under the potentially disloyal Lithuanians. Interestingly, Stalin's successor, Nikita Khrushchev, offered the entire Kaliningrad Oblast to the Lithuanian SSR in 1950, but with perhaps decades of foresight, Antanas Sniečkus, a Lithuanian communist politician and the country's first secretary at the time, refused to accept the territory with the concern that accepting the offer would conveniently add at least 1 million ethnic Russians to Lithuania, which would make the republic about 1/3 Russian. Looking at how the Crimea to Ukraine transfer eventually turned out, it's obvious that this decision taken by the Lithuanians was a profoundly wise one. During the years of the Cold War, the Soviets transformed Kaliningrad into a very important naval facility, and the city was completely closed to foreigners, except for the rare visits of friends from neighbouring Poland. The city was rebuilt into an essentially copy and paste model of the Soviet-style city. By the time the Cold War was nearing its end in 1990, East and West Germany were reunifying, while the Soviet Union was collapsing. Kaliningrad remained a part of the newly formed Russian Federation, which simply retained all the land of the previous Soviet Republic that included Kaliningrad. After the events in 2010, the German magazine Der Spiegel published a report that claimed that Soviets had allegedly offered Kaliningrad back to Germany in 1990, as the country was actively reunifying. The West German government, which at the time saw reunification with East Germany as a higher priority, did not take this offer seriously. However, this story was later denied by Mikhail Gorbachev, and Kaliningrad has remained Russian ever since, although it has been getting more and more isolated from the rest of Russia. Kaliningrad became a fully separated district of Russia hundreds of kilometers away from the main line in 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed. In order to maximize this isolation, the Russians transformed the exclave into a special economic zone. It allowed the region to conduct trade free of any taxes or duties. The idea was to transform Kaliningrad into a special administrative region of Russia because of its proximity to European countries. However, the plan flopped as Poland went on to join NATO in 1999. And by 2004, Poland and Lithuania each joined the European Union and NATO, leaving Kaliningrad's special economic zone deep in the west. After the invasion of Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea, the West began to impose its first round of economic sanctions. And as a result, Kaliningrad's proximity to Europe went from being its greatest strength to its biggest weakness. However, Russia cares less about the economic benefits of Kaliningrad and more about the geographic leverage and flexibility that it provides to the Russian armed forces in a strong defense against the West during any potential conflict. It can serve as an early warning station to the Russian mainland against any Western attacks. It also acts as the forward air defense base for operation for Russian jets coming in from the mainland. It also serves as the headquarters of the Baltic Fleet, as it's the only all-round ice-free port in the Baltic Sea. Basically, the Kaliningrad enables the Russians to conduct naval maneuvers in the Gulf of Finland and the central Baltics. This level of freedom is obviously important to Russia, and they don't plan on losing it anytime soon. If anyone tries to mess with it, you can be sure there will be deadly consequences. Now that we've come to the end of this video, remember to like and subscribe, so that more exciting content can reach your screen in the future.